Hello! In this video, I will show you how to use Transferwise payout system. Now, it's not as straightforward as that, but there are several parts that you need to understand of the whole arrangement. You need to execute a few sort of procedures, make a few API calls in order to have your own sort of payout system. Now, there are, as I mentioned, a few steps, a few things you have to do, but mainly there are three of them, right? There are three steps. First of all, you have to have your recipients, that is in Transferwise, you have your recipients. Then you have your quotes, and then you have your transfers. I'm going to also show you how you can deal with such API arrangements, so how you can more easily integrate really any API in C# programming language, how you can save time doing that integration when there's no library for C#. And in this case, there's no library, so we have to sort of deal with these raw API calls to the Transferwise API. I'll also show you how to set it up a bit and things like that. Now, it's not the best API in the world, but it's not the worst as well. It does work, it does function, it is a bit tricky to access sometimes. But first of all, let's look at the structure that you need to establish basically in order for this to work. So, as mentioned previously, the first step is a recipient. You create a recipient, which basically is the name and the bank address, the bank name, code, bank account rather, name or code, or IBAN in Europe, that would be, right? But we have several currencies, actually quite a few currencies we have, and each currency has a different arrangement. So basically, you create a recipient for whatever currency they will have, for whatever bank details basically they have. You create a recipient, right? So once you have the recipient, you can use it and reuse it as many times as you want, okay? That's the recipient. That's the first thing you need to have. Once you have the recipient, you need to create something called a quote, okay? Now, a quote basically locks in the rate, the exchange rate. Say your balance is in euros, you're transferring to dollars, it will lock in that exchange rate at which your transfer will happen for sure. And as you can guess, the third step will be making the transfer, okay? Now, the quote will also provide the fee, so you create a quote that locks in the rate and you get a bit of data in response, as usual, right? And that is where the fee will be. So if you're worried about fees, you can deal with that as well, okay? So again, let's look at this. We have creating recipient, then creating a quote, okay? And then creating a transfer. Now, a recipient can be reused as many times as you want, and a quote is created as a quote, right? You provide the amount, you provide the currency from and to. That's it. It is not associated with any specific recipient. A quote is standalone, and one quote is for one transfer, okay? You create a quote, you do a transfer. You create a quote, you do a transfer. One quote for one transfer. Now, with that said, let's jump into some bit of preparation, and then we will jump into some bit of code. So let's start from some basic stuff. Now, first of all, you need to create that account, that specific account for the Transferwise, for the testing mode, sandbox mode, right? You need to have that. But with that, you also need to sort of download a few things. Not download in the sense of a file download, but just go through Postman and retrieve a couple of pieces of data. Quite a weird arrangement and doesn't work all that well, but not the worst one in the world. So, in the API description documentation, you will see this link, sandbox-transferwise.tech. So you go here and you register. Now notice right away there is a two-factor authentication, sort of a copy of the original, but it doesn't work that well. and it's supposed to be for testing, right? It's all in the testing mode, the whole thing. So there's no reason to change anything, no different, say, tokens for different places, live and testing, right? There's no such thing. You just go and work with the sandbox. Now, the two-factor authentication is 11111, this little code right here. That is the two-factor authentication, so it doesn't actually send a message to your phone, and you can basically just enter any random phone that you want. Now, I already created this account. It doesn't take long to do it. You just basically enter some random information, and that's all that there is to it. It is a sandbox account. It won't really send anything anywhere, and you're just using it for sort of testing, and that's it. Okay, now in the API documentation, you also see authorization, and now I'm going to show you where to find the token. Okay, there's only one token. There are two sort of types or preferences on that token, but it's only one type of token here. So if we go to the account, okay, we go to the account, we go to settings. Okay, we go to settings, and then in the settings you'll find API tokens. Okay, API tokens. Now, it didn't really work that well, so I created two of them, right? I created two of them. I couldn't retrieve them, but basically what you do, you go add new token right here. Just quickly, I'm going to show you if I can do it. Sometimes, again, it doesn't really work that well, and it takes a while to load. But we'll get the token. The token is used for all the interactions with Transferwise API. But we will need to retrieve something else through Postman. So this is how you create the token, the name for the token, and then you choose either full access or just read only. I would suggest using full access all the time, unless you have specific need for read only. But usually you will probably use this API for full access, at least if you are using payouts, right? There's no other way around it. So let's close that. And then once you have the token, you need to actually retrieve it. And to retrieve it, you go down and down and down, and then you click reveal key. Okay, the API key. So you take that key, copy it, and then go to Postman. Go to Postman, and then you need to retrieve the ID for the profile. Okay, for the profile. So you will probably have, in the real world scenario, you will have your personal account and then your business account, and maybe a few more business accounts. So that is a possibility as well, right? So you have both, and you have an ID, a little ID, an integer for each and every one of them. So you have to retrieve a specific one with which you will be working. Okay, you retrieve specific ID for that specific profile, either business or personal. And to do that, you need to go and do this. API sandbox, that's the main route to the whole thing, right? api.sandbox.transferwise.tech. You can find that in the description. And then we have this route, version 1, v1, and profiles. Okay, now all this takes is the token. We have authorization, okay, key authorization, and then you have to do bearer. Okay, you have to do bearer, then space. Okay, after bearer you have space, and after space you have your token. It's a bit of an annoying arrangement, and maybe it's easy to make a mistake on this one as well. But this is what you do. You do bearer, space, and then your actual token. This is how it works. And then you send it. You send it, and then you retrieve it. Let's actually send it, and then I'll show you what you actually need to pick. Okay, let's see. We have the response right here, and we have ID. Okay, ID, and this, as you can see, is type personal, and then you see the details for that account as well. Okay, so you have the ID. If you are using personal, you choose this one. If you are using business, you choose this one. Okay, So each account has a number or an ID, right? So now you know how to retrieve the tokens and you know how to retrieve the ID. These things are essential, and with that we can jump into some code. It is now time to take a look at how you can create a recipient. Now, creating a recipient is extremely important because this is basically the part where you declare the details, the bank details for the person or the entity to which you will actually send the money. This is very important. This is something that you have to be very, very careful about. And there are some tricky bits, unfortunately, about this. So let's start with the basic stuff, and I'll explain to you everything else along the way. First of all, in the Transferwise, you see recipients right here on the left, recipients, and once you go in, you have them created. Now you can create them manually as well, okay, but obviously, if you're doing this payout thing, you'll need some codes and things like that. So it's best to create them via the API, right? And as you can see, I have previously created a few. These are created through the API, 3 of them. And you can see one of them is euro and 2 of them would be dollars, United States dollars. Each and every currency has a different kind of a request, which is quite normal because you have different details for a USD account, different details for Euro account, but it is the tricky bit, one of the tricky bits in this arrangement. Now, in the API, if I go in here, just a basic documentation, and I go create recipient account. The example here will be in GBP. Now, I believe if you create an account on a different country, it will give you a different example. But if you want to find the other options, you need to go more to the bottom, okay? So basically, you go to recipient accounts, which you probably won't see that well, but once you go to recipient accounts, you need to go down even more, and then you see the whole list of these different regions, different currencies, right? So if I go to say CAD, it will say Canadian, right? Recipient type, and it will give me all the data that I need to upload for that particular account to happen, okay? For that particular recipient to be created. And if I need, say, euro right here, I click on euro, and then you see the data will be different for euro as well. It will require IBAN and all that stuff. So each and every one is different, okay? Now then, there is no library here. There is no library, so we need a different way to make this work. And what I do, I use a simple, you can find these online all the time. I don't recommend any particular one, but basically what you do, you would copy this. You would go to one of those systems, they're called JSON to C#, for example, and you copy this JSON, and what it does, it establishes a sort of class model, class structure for this JSON. And with that, we can then use get from JSON or post as JSON and then retrieve a content type, read as JSON, a thing. So let's take a look at the code. Let's take a look at the code, and let's take a look at the request itself first before we go into the actual code. But as you can see, I have a couple of routes here, one for euros and the other one for dollars. So this is what I need to send for the dollars, right? Now, this actually goes through my API first, and then it goes into the Stripe's API. We need to do that because there is a token involved which has to be stationed, so to speak, server side, right? Obviously, if you have your own WPF application, you could just do it right away. It depends on what you need, but this would be a sort of safe way to do it in general. So we have we have new recipient, that's the route, and then this is what we saw on API, rather Transferwise, or authentication. I almost said Stripe, and you can look at a few of my videos about Stripe as well, how to handle refunds as well as how to retrieve charges. Also, you can take a look at my Stripe course where you'll learn how to deal with Stripe checkouts and Stripe checkouts for subscriptions. Now, back to this thing, we have profile, then we have account holder name, and then everything else is pretty much by default except for the type. Okay, we have the type. Now, if you do business, you should match that with that, otherwise it won't work from what I know. May have been just a glitch, but it won't work. But basically, if this is business, your profile ID has to be business as well. We saw that previously, how to retrieve the profile ID, right? And after that, you simply provide IBAN. That's a simple system. It recognizes every IBAN and does its job. This is how you deal with it, right? Get that IBAN, holder name. This is the account holder, so this is the receiver's name, okay? This is the receiver's name. So basically, you need to ask them for their name and for their IBAN, and that's all you need. You don't need to ask for their addresses and things like that, although you could just for safety reasons, I guess. But this is what you need to make this request work. Now then, I'll need to show you a little trick that I established and I use for most implementations where I have to use sort of raw APIs with no libraries. This is how to create models. How to create these models, because the ones, the response models, at least in this case, provided in the API's documentation, do not work. They fail. So I have to work it out in a different way. Now, let's try to send it. Let's see what happens. I do believe I have a breakpoint in the API. Yes, I do indeed. Now, you see, we have payouts euro. This is a class. And then we have a simple static method, task method, which takes new recipient data. Okay, this object it takes, it's defined right here. Okay, so as you can see, it was just a simple conversion from that JSON. I didn't actually write this, I just converted it, and that saved hours and hours of time. Obviously not in this case alone, but you'll see there are quite a few models here, and it does actually save hours upon hours of time. So we have this breakpoint. Now, again, as I mentioned previously, I could not convert the JSON provided in the API documentation to these models because it was not matching. Maybe it was an older version. I don't know. It's a bit sloppy in the documentation. But still, I can, however, retrieve this response. Now, this is a string response. So what I do is I go to text visualizer, I click on that. It will open up and it will give me the sort of actual JSON that it retrieves, right? The JSON that it retrieves. And then I can copy this and convert this to some C# class models. And then I will use that arrangement for returns. Now, the first time it will fail, and then obviously you would want to delete this string part because it's a waste of space, right? But the first time you copy it and then you set it all up, it probably won't fail right away, and you'll be good to go, right? You'll be good to go. Now, you can find all of these codes and pieces of code on my Patreon. You'll find that. You'll also find some great deals on my courses. But getting back to this, we have a relatively simple arrangement, okay? We have a very simple arrangement. I'm going to continue. And as you can see, we retrieve a response. We retrieve a response like this. Now, another thing is we have this IBAN, okay? We have this IBAN. So I'm going to actually go back here, okay? Remove that, and I'm going to send this again. Now, notice, we had response, the new ID 751, okay, 751 for this recipient, 751. I'm going to send it again, sending, okay. Now see again, the new response, this is actually the new response, and guess what it says? 751, 162, 751, I can do it again. Okay, 162, 751, let's see again. And once again, 162, 751, whatever it is, right? Basically what happens is, unless you actually change this, the IBAN, it will not create a new recipient. Instead, it will just retrieve the data for the one that's already created. It won't overwrite anything. It won't rather create a copy of anything. It will just have the same thing. For the USD part, it's the same kind of thing. We have a profile, okay, that's our profile, right? We have account holder's name. We have a bit more data in this case, right? We have more details, basically the address. We have more details required because it is USD account, and it will be different for different currencies. So you do have a different model. You do have to use a different model for the USD. The response is pretty much the same, right? It is pretty much the same. We have a few more details perhaps, but nothing too fancy. It's actually sort of the same model, right? The same model that we use for that response. The response is fine either way. Okay, now then let's close it. Let's close it and let's get to the code. Let's see what happens, what the code looks like in general. For now, we will take a look at the whole arrangement of creating the recipients, and then we will take a look at the other things, the other parts of this whole arrangement. As you know, there are basically 3 parts to this whole arrangement. First of all, in the payouts.cs, you will find recipient data details and recipient data. So this is part of the whole JSON arrangement that was converted through one of those tools. Again, I did not waste my time rewriting this in a C# kind of a way from JSON, right? I just converted it, and it's always a better decision, as you might just waste time and then realize that it was done wrong, the API documentation was wrong, and then you have to rewrite it according to the way I've shown you previously, right? So it can be annoying. It's better just convert it and trust that system. Okay, so we have recipient details, some details, right? You saw that this is what we get for the recipient, depending on the region, country, currency rather, right? On the type of the recipient, basically. Okay, and this is what we have in the payout. So we have the general return type basically in the payouts.cs. You can find this code, of course, on Patreon, and just like you can find any source code of my videos. And let's take a look at payouts.usd. This is quite similar. Okay, this is quite similar indeed. We just have these models. We have new recipient data. Okay, new recipient means this is what you upload, right? This is what you upload. New recipient. See, like that. And we have our task create recipient async. So we just take new recipient, okay, and we use post as JSON async, and then we do read from JSON async from the content, and that's it. You see, the whole work with this kind of an integration is in establishing the models. Now, since we found already a quick way to establish the models, obviously you need to deal with some issues here and there, but a quick way, let's call it. There is not that much to do. You generate the models, and then you can use post as JSON or get from JSON async, right? And you get that, and you retrieve that, or you upload that, and that's it. You just provide a few variables here and then, the parameters, and that's it. Now, the route for this arrangement is the version 1 accounts, right? And it takes a recipient. Now we have a different one for euros. The reason it's different is because new recipient has to be different. So that's why I created a couple of these classes. I thought it would be more readable if you will actually get this code and take a look at it. It would be actually quite useful for you to take this code and just sort of reuse it on your own application, but do be careful, do take a look, do test it rather, see if it actually works. Also put in those try-catch statements in more places than you actually see in this example. I do not want to overcomplicate things. Sometimes the code can become rather unreadable when you do things like that. So I try to basically keep it as simple as possible, but once in a real world scenario you should update it, upgrade it a bit, add a few more safeguards just in case, right? Other than that, again, it takes new recipient data and it gets it out. So that's it for the recipients, and now we can move on to creating the quotes. Now then, on to the quotes, and the quotes we'll start with the code, then later I will show you what needs to be inserted in order to create one. But basically a quote is just a tool that locks in the exchange rate. It locks in the exchange rate, and then you can be sure that the transfer will happen on that rate. One quote is for one transfer. So you create a quote and then go do a transfer using that quote. A transfer must have a quote. That's it. That's all there is to it. So now let's see. It's the same approach as any other arrangement that we have here. It will be create a quote. Okay, we take new quote data, which was again JSON copied and generated. Now unfortunately again the response wasn't working, so I had to invoke this method. I got the string, then from the string I got obviously it's a JSON string, right? So from that I got my models, and then I have this quote. And in this case it is a static method because we don't really construct anything. We don't really need a kind of a constructor, so it was just quicker and simpler and more straightforward to do it this way, right? And once again, you can actually download this code from Patreon. Every member of mine gets access to the source codes for the tutorials here on YouTube. Also, you get some great deals on my courses, some free courses if you support me on Patreon. So, quote models, right? This is what we have. We have new quote data, so that is profile, source, target, something called target, right? You will see that once we get into the data, the amount, of course, the most important part, and then we have some details, okay? So this is the actual quote. Basically, what it does, it locks in that rate, and then it generates the output, which also contains the fee. So you know the fee before the transfer happens. And that's the whole thing of Transferwise. They're supposed to have no hidden fees. They declare the fee before you take action. And actually, that's a good thing, right? That's always a good thing. So now let's take a look at how you actually send this data and what happens after you do that. Now then, what you have to provide is only the profile. We have profile, remember we retrieved that get profile ID, profiles, right? This is how we retrieve it, and then we provide it in here for the quote, new quote, and that's it. That's all you need to provide. Also, you have your source and target. That's what you need to provide, and the amount, okay? But as far as looking for something, searching for something, retrieving something from other API routes, that is only the profile, and you only retrieve it once. You don't need to retrieve it several times, right? So after that, we have euros to euros, right? The source would be obviously your balance from which you fund this transfer, and then target will be your target. That would be the currency of your recipient, the currency of the recipient. If it's USD, it's USD. If it's euro, it should be euro, right? Wherever you go. It depends, right, on that. But the source, again, it's a balance. So in this case, it's euro to euro, right? And there won't be any transfer in here, but it could be USD to euro or euro to USD or something different. After that, this goes by default. And then we have target amount as well. Target amount is 500. But mind you, 500, this is not in cents. We are not dealing in cents like we would in Stripe. We are dealing in decimals, basically, in a normal currency. So that's 500 euros. It's not 5 euros, it's 500 euros. And then we have type balance payout. This is how we want to pay it out. So once you have this quote, you can use it in the transfers. And now let's take a look at that. Finally, we can take a look at the transfer itself. So once you have your recipients ready, and once you have your quotes ready, or rather a quote ready, you can begin with the transfer of the actual payout, right? You send the transfer, that's your payout. Now, the recipient, obviously, it should be created once and maybe stored in your database or something like that, should be arranged, right? But the quote, you create a quote and then do a transfer for that quote. That's how it should work. Okay, now then, what kind of data do you need? And that is quite straightforward. You need a target account, okay? Target account. So target account is your recipient. When you create a recipient, you get that account ID, the recipient's ID, and that is what you use. Target account. It goes to that recipient. That's what it does. Now, the second thing is the quote, as I mentioned. One quote for one transfer. You use it, and that's it. One quote for one transfer. Remember that. Recipient ID is reusable as many times as you want and need, but the quote is for only one transfer, and that's it. Now then, we have something called customer transaction ID. This is something that you can generate yourself. Okay, this is something that you can generate yourself. I'll actually have to change the number because it has to be unique. This thing has to be unique, otherwise it will be the same as creating the same recipient. It will just return that same data and that's it. Okay, and then we have the reference. Let's change that as well. Okay, and then we have transfer purpose and source of funds, and these should stay by default as default, I believe. Okay, I don't think there's a reason to actually change these. As provided by default, that is fine. Unfortunately, the response, again, it doesn't really work out that well if you deal with the one provided in the API documentation, so you have to generate one yourself. But we do have this, and we can send it. I believe we can send it, and let's get a response. Okay, a little breakpoint, but again, we have to take a look. And remember, if you ever need to generate a model like that, just go here, go to text visualizer and copy that, and you'll be good to go. Let's go through that and let's see. Now we have a little bit of a problem. It gives me 0, and I do believe there is a reason for that. I did not actually copy the new quote. That one was already used and abused. Okay, so let's see if I can copy the new quote and provide that here. Okay, that was wrong, of course. Okay, let's copy that. A bit of a live action here. Okay, let's copy and paste that like that, and then I'll send it again. And it should work now. It should work perfectly. Now, let's try to remove this breakpoint at this point, right? We don't need it. Okay, we're back, and now it worked. Now it worked. It says incoming payment waiting, the status. Status is something that you should check. These will be created, and once there's enough payment, enough money rather in the balance, they should be executed. But that's again quite a bit of a problem with the sandbox account. It doesn't really have money, and it's a bit difficult to add some money into these balances. So it is a bit troublesome that way. But once you have the money, in theory, it should go through. So do check for these statuses, these different statuses, and do attempt, if you're doing this in real world, do attempt to actually try different statuses. Now, you may be watching this video right now. It's the first month of 2021, but you may be watching it in late 2021, and something might change by then, okay? The word might be different. It might say incoming waiting payment instead of incoming payment waiting, and it will be a problem, right? So do check for these things before going live, or when developing rather, right? You need to check for them. But other than that, as you can see, the quote has to be unique, and customer transaction ID has to be unique, and that is something that you generate in your own system, so for your own database reference basically, and then you can retrieve them like that. So this is how you deal with those payments. And again, we have these different models. You can find this source code in my Patreon. You can also take a look at my Stripe course, at my API development course. Both of them will be useful, and if you sort of combine the payouts of Transferwise and have pay-ins, right, the payments using Stripe, I believe that will be a perfect system, and that is something that I would do as well, because there's really no other system that's sort of as good as this arrangement. So, with that said, we will conclude this.